friends, welcome to this week's vlog. As mentioned in the previous video, we were taking a weekend trip to a concert and that trip was to New York. It's been over a decade since I last went to New York and this was the first time that I was responsible for the activities. We had less than 48 hours in the city, so we were trying to make the most of the trip, but also weren't too worried if we weren't able to do everything since our time was so short. We ended up driving to the city, which was about a 5-hour car trip. We parked in Hoboken and then took the PATH train over the river into the city and then took the subway to Brooklyn where our hotel was. We were staying at the Even Hotel and I chose this location because it was within walking distance of the Barclays Center, which is where our concert was. The hotel was clean, but I could definitely tell that it wasn't brand new. And this hotel chain has a fitness theme to it. But honestly, if you are in New York as a tourist, the city itself is probably a full workout for you. So I don't know how much working out you're gonna do at the hotel. There were a few downsides that I noticed about this hotel, just in case anybody's interested in staying there. While we were there was only one ice machine, which was down in the lobby. And this meant that if a bunch of people before you got ice, there might not be ice when you tried to get ice. Their website also said that they had a restaurant, but this was more like a bar with a limited food menu. And the only drinks that they actually did sell were beer and wine, so no cocktails. I will also say our hotel room had a sliding barn door, which I am not the biggest fan of. If you are staying with anybody in that room, you have to be very comfortable with them because they are not very soundproof. Fortunately, I was staying with my partner, so that wasn't an issue. And speaking of soundproof, the windows were not soundproof. We were on the 12th floor, so pretty high up, but we could still hear all of the sirens and horns through the window. So if you're gonna stay here and you think that'll be an issue, definitely bring earplugs. But I will say the bed was very comfortable, the sheets were clean, and the location was very convenient for us. And since we weren't spending a ton of time in the hotel except to sleep, it did its job. Once we got into the city and dropped our stuff off at the hotel, we went to have a late lunch at El Sazon, which is a Mexican restaurant a few blocks away from the hotel. So we walked there. Their food was delicious. We really enjoyed the salsa verde that they had, and I got a pina colada. It was a little different than any pina colada I've had before. It's very creamy. I also got the pork tacos, which were great. The pork was a little charred and it was topped with a pineapple and a red onion, which paired really nicely with that pork. My partner got the chiles en nogada, which was a stuffed pepper, and he really enjoyed that as well. After lunch, we stopped at a coffee place called IVX Coffee. I'm not sure if it's actually pronounced IVX or if it's 410, not clear on that. But it was a coffee shop that seemed to be set up in someone's garage on the street level, which seems very Brooklyn. And their coffee was really great, and they had this sustainable, eco-friendly objective to them. That evening we had tickets to Beetlejuice on Broadway, and we had a bit of time to spare before we needed to go into Manhattan. So we stopped at McNally Jackson, which was within walking distance of our hotel, and this is a small independent bookstore in Brooklyn. I really loved it there. I thought their section layout was really great. We didn't have a ton of time there, but I ended up picking up 3 books, which you can see in the book haul portion of this video. They had a great staff rack wall, and I liked that they had their literature split up into where it was from. And then after that, we took the subway into Manhattan, and the show that we were seeing was at the Marquee Theater, which unfortunately is in Times Square. And listen, I understand if you're a kid and it's your first time in New York City, Times Square can be exciting, it's bright, there's lots of people around, there's tons of things to see and look at, but in my opinion, it's a nightmare. I don't recommend going there unless you have to, unless you're doing something in Times Square. I would avoid it otherwise. Just sort of packed and smelly and just full of tourist traps, you know. Not my first recommendation on going into the city, but we had to be there for the show. And then bad news about this vlog is I did not love Beetlejuice, and I think this partly might be because I had such high expectations for the show. I love the film of Beetlejuice so much. I've watched it a lot. I'll start by saying that this is definitely a watchable musical, and a lot of other people were having a great time, so I think this might just be my experience. So don't let that deter you from going to go see it, and I think I'm in the minority with not liking it as much. But I'll start with the pros, and that I thought the actors sung the songs phenomenally. They all had great voices, especially the actress who played Lydia. She had a stellar voice. I thought the lighting design was on point. It was some great lighting design. I thought it complemented the show very well, and I also thought the stage design and the prop design was done very well as well. I will say hands down, Delia was my favorite character, and she was played by Leslie Rodriguez-Kritzer. She did an absolutely great job with that role. And I wanted her to be on stage all of the time. I will also say that Zonia Love, who was in the ensemble, ate it every single time that she came onto that stage. She had a few of the larger background roles, and I understand why, because she just did a great job. I wish they would have cast her in a larger role because she was so good. And now for what I didn't love about the show. First, they do not follow the story from the movie, which I understand why they made that choice, but I don't think that the plot that they went with was better than the original. So, I mean, if you're gonna do an alternate story, at least make it more entertaining or just as good as the original, which just wasn't, unfortunately. Two, I just didn't think a lot of the jokes landed, and I thought a few of them were in poor taste. There was a scene where they're talking about teaching their kids Spanish and they break out the maracas. There is also a running joke where Beetlejuice mentions the guy in the audience, who I'm sure he's not pointing at a specific person, but if somebody's having a real bad day in the audience, I just feel like they could feel like it's about them and could really bum them out. So I just didn't think those were the best taste in jokes. And three, this is not a knock at the actors because I'm sure that their characters were written this way, but Adam and Barbara were incredibly annoying. Like, think of the most annoying theater kid that you've ever met, and that was them. They were like Rachel Berry 100% of the time, and I wish they died and just stayed dead. No ghosts. Four, I thought the songs were pretty forgettable, and like I said previously, the actors sung them very well. I just don't think I would re-listen to this soundtrack, and there are definitely some show tunes that I love that I will listen to regularly, and these will not make the rounds of that. And again, I think I was in the minority of this show, and I myself am strange and unusual. No, I am disappointed that I did not love this show as much as I wanted to. But definitely, if this is something that interests you when you go to New York, I would recommend seeing it because I think other people would have a better time with it than I did. Okay, on to day 2. We started our day in Manhattan and we had lunch at the Orsay, which was a French restaurant pretty close to Central Park and the Met. And my partner and I both got the French onion soup. Ooh, and it was delicious. It had this lovely beef flavor that was really distinct from any other French onion soup that I've had, which I've had a lot of French onion soup in my life. It's one of my favorite soups. And then I got the quiche du moment, which the flavor was really nice. It was very rich. It had bacon and tomatoes and onion and I think Gruyere in it. Unfortunately, the texture itself was a bit too wet for my liking, and I don't know if that's because of the vegetables that were in it, the tomatoes and the onions, if that made it a little bit more wet, or if it's because it was a crustless quiche, so they had it in a little bowl, so I'm sure they oiled the bottom of it, so I don't know if it was that was making it wet, or a combination of two of them, but it was a little too wet for my taste, but the flavor of it was very nice. And it came with a spring green salad, which was lightly coated in oil. And this was very bitter, and I would say the bitterness did really pair very well with the richness of the quiche, but I think on its own it was a little too bitter. So if you finish your quiche and you have a bunch of salad left, I didn't end up finishing it all because it was a lot of arugula, a lot of bitter greens. And then my partner got the tuna tartare and loved it to the point where he was still thinking about it the next day. I also tried a little bit of it and it was very good. It was basically some raw tuna that was molded into a little puck. And there was some panko mixed in there, so there was a little bit of crunch along with it. It was very good. And then after lunch, we made our way to the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the fastest visit ever to the Met. We only had about an hour there, and even if you had a whole day there or even a week, I don't think that's enough time to really explore the Met. As an art lover and a museum lover, I would highly recommend adding the Met to your tour. I've been 3 times in the past and have loved every time. They have an absolutely phenomenal collection, and I think they have something that would interest anybody, but I would recommend maybe focusing on just a couple galleries that you are most interested in if you go, just because, like I said, it's an overwhelming amount of stuff and you really can't see everything there in one trip. My partner and I split up while we were there so we could go look at different stuff. He was more interested in the medieval armor on the first floor, and I love the Impressionists, so I headed up to the second floor to the Gallery of the 20th Century Paintings. And because we went on a Sunday in the afternoon, it was pretty packed, but you were still able to move around okay and have time in front of every painting that you wanted to see, though I'm sure that there are other days during the week that you could go where it would be less crowded. And then after the Met, we walked to Ladurée, which was a few blocks away. This is a very small location of Ladurée. They only have about 5 cafe tables there, which are casual, first come, first serve dining, so I would not count on getting a spot unless you're lucky. If it's a nice day, you could definitely take your pastries and go eat in Central Park, but fortunately we were lucky when we got there and somebody just left a table as we came, so we grabbed that. We ended up getting some iced coffees, and then I got the pistachio Saint-Honoré, which was lovely. It had this flaky pastry base with a pistachio glaze on it, topped with mini eclairs with a pistachio filling, and then all of that was topped with a pistachio whipped cream and garnished with pistachio nuts. How many times can I say pistachio describing this dessert? It was buttery and creamy, but not overbearing in terms of sweetness, and had this lovely light pistachio nutty flavor to it. I also got a caramel eclair to take with us, which I ate later, and unfortunately I wasn't as big a fan of that, and I don't think I would get it again. I thought the choux pastry was a little overcooked, and the caramel flavor was so subtle to the point where it was almost unnoticeable, and the choux flavor of the pastry actually overwhelmed any other flavor of the eclair. And then we ended our night with the reason for the trip, the pièce de résistance, the My Chemical Romance concert at the Barclays. The concert was completely sold out, and the energy in the building was just phenomenal. Everyone was hyped and happy, and the concert was just momentous. It was so good. The band were all on point, and Gerard Way did amazing on the vocals, but the real standout was Ray Toro on the lead guitar. And while MCR is an emo band with some pretty emotional and depressing songs, the energy in the entire stadium was just one of absolute ecstasy. For many of us, we've been waiting for this moment for years, and just the joy from the crowd was palpable. I saw one article call it cathartic, and I think that really sums up the event as a whole. And then with that, our New York trip came to a close. We walked back to our hotel for one last sleep, and then the next morning we checked out and drove home. It was a fantastic trip overall, definitely a great weekend trip, one I'll remember for the rest of my life. And with one trip down, I actually have another impromptu trip this coming weekend. With everything that was going on, I just haven't had a ton of time to read this week. The only book I've finished so far is Volume 3 of Imakoi, but I did start Jane Emily by Patricia Clapp. I'm trying to get most of this video done soon because I leave tomorrow for my second trip, and I'll talk to you guys later, and happy reading! And time for the book haul portion of this video. I've gathered quite a few books this month. I'll start with the ones that I've gotten from Barnes & Noble. First up, we have From Dust Return by Ray Bradbury. I heard about this one from Darling Desi, though I've had a few autumnal Bradbury books on my TBR in the past. But when she described this one as the Addams Family, I looked it up immediately and knew I had to get it the next time I went into the bookstore. And from the synopsis, this seems a bit like What We Do in the Shadows. Sounds like a family of vampires living in Upper Illinois, and a perfectly cozy fall read. I then have Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This has been one I've wanted to pick up since last year, but I was waiting for it to come out in paperback, and I almost didn't recognize it when I saw it in the bookstore because the cover is so different from the hardcover. And this follows Annie, who moves from Manhattan to a small quaint town in upstate New York after being dumped by her boyfriend. There she meets Sophie, who is charismatic and charming, but the whole town seems to be afraid of her. And Annie is drawn to Sophie and whatever power she seems to wield. Then I have Unmask Alice, LSD, Satanic Panic, and the Imposter Behind the World's Most Notorious Diaries by Rick Emerson. When I heard about this book's release, I knew it was only a matter of time before I got it. I definitely had a strong emo phase in middle school, hence the MCR concert, and I read all of the edgy books, including Go Ask Alice by Anonymous. But in reality, Go Ask Alice actually came from a serial con artist, Beatrice Sparks, who, to quote the synopsis, betrayed a grieving family, stole a dead boy's memory, and lied her way to the National Book Awards. So this sounds really interesting. I've seen a few people pick this up and they enjoyed their read. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting to this one. I then have 2 manga to continue series. I have Imakoi Volume 3 by Ayuko Hata, and I've already read and enjoyed this one, and I'll discuss this a little later in the video. I then have Volume 18 of Full Metal Alchemist, the Full Metal Edition. And I will say Full Metal Alchemist is still one of my favorite manga series to date, and I think that's because it is so well crafted. Sometimes with manga, because they're serialized, the mangakas will have a really strong idea to start out with, but they don't necessarily flesh out the ending, and they don't know where it goes. Or if a series becomes very popular and the publishers want to keep selling it, the mangaka will have to come up with other storylines. But I feel like with Full Metal Alchemist, it feels so intentional from start to finish, and it doesn't feel like it lasts longer than it needs to. I highly recommend this for anyone who is at all remotely interested in manga and hasn't picked it up yet, though I think that won't be many people because of how well loved this series is, and I think it is really an introduction manga for a lot of people. This follows the Elric brothers, who are alchemists who are on a quest to discover the legendary Philosopher's Stone to restore their bodies to what they once were after performing forbidden alchemy that went terribly wrong. So along their journey, they meet these mysterious and malicious creatures called homunculi who seem to have something to do with the Philosopher's Stone and have an agenda of their own. And there just might be some government involvement too. And then next up, I have 3 of the little cloth-bound classics from Penguin that were put out in August. I have Lady Susan by Jane Austen, Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner, and The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson. There are others in this collection that I would definitely like to collect, but these were the 3 that I knew when I saw the initial 10 that they were putting out that I had to have in my collection. These are so cute and small and a perfect addition to anybody's library. And to tell you what these are about, there's Lady Susan, which is an epistolary novel written by Austen in 1794, and this chronicles the schemes of the titular character as she is trying to marry off her daughter and have a few conquests of her own. And while I think this edition is so cute, I'm not exactly sure why they chose this one to be in this collection, as they've already included this story in 2 other of the full-sized cloth-bound classics. This appears in the Sanditon edition as well as the Love and Friendship edition that they put out a couple years ago, but it's hard for me to say no to Pretty Austens, so I got it. And then next we have Lolly Willows, which I already owned the New York Review Books edition of this, but I could not pass up this absolutely stunning version. It's just such a beautiful autumnal design. And this follows an aging woman who leaves behind her overbearing family and moves to the countryside to practice witchcraft. So a nice cozy read for this time of year. And then we have my queen, Shirley Jackson. I absolutely love Jackson so much. And if there's only one book in this collection that they put out that I could get, it would be this one. And this contains a collection of stories by Jackson, including her most well-known, The Lottery. And then I have 2 books that I picked up as potential books for my best friend book club that I do with my high school best friend. There's a 3rd one on its way, but it hasn't come in yet. But we have Late at Night by William Scholl. And this sounds like And Then There Were None, but make it supernatural. A group of people gather on Lamerty Island off the coast of Maine, where there are rumors of psychic forces caused by terrible events in the past. They discover a book that details their deaths through supernatural means, and unless they unmask the culprit behind everything, their fates will be sealed. And then I have Jane Emily by Patricia Clapp. There is a slightly better cover than this one, but that one tends to be a little bit pricier to get your hands on. But I did also really like this absolute absurd illustration. We have sort of this Marvel movie poster format with the composition of people, of the lady in the front, this man way back here, and then this child who is like Madame Leota in her little crystal ball head. And there's this teeny house and 2 moons, and what is going on in this cover? This follows Louisa, who is staying with her young niece Jane and her niece's grandmother for the summer at their house. However, when her niece becomes obsessed with the mirrored ball out in the garden, she begins to see the image of Emily, who is the deceased daughter of the grandmother. And as events unfold, if something isn't done soon, then Jane may follow the fate of Emily and also perish. I can't imagine that this will be super high stakes or scary, as it is for 12 and up and was written in 1969, but I could be wrong about that. It does seem like a fun time. And then I have the 3 books that I picked up while I was in New York at McNally Jackson. I only had about 20 minutes there, so it was a fast book haul. And there are 2 that I had heard of previously and were on my radar of things that I wanted to pick up. And they were also on the staff rec wall, which gave me confidence in getting them. The first is The Corner That Held Them by Sylvia Townsend Warner, who also wrote Lally Willows that I just showed. And this is a historical novel that takes place in the 1300s during the Black Plague in a convent in Norfolk. And it follows the daily lives of the nuns who live there, who've renounced the world, but somehow the world keeps making its way back into the convent. I then have The Invention of Morel by Adolfo Bioy Casares, and this is translated by Ruth L.C. Sims. And this is a novella that takes place on a mysterious island, and it's an exploration of virtual realities. And that's sort of all I really know about it. It is pretty short, so I don't think it's good to know too much about it, but it is compared to The Turn of the Screw, which I didn't love, but I still like the premise of. And then the 3rd book I picked up is Emily Berry's newest poetry collection, An Exhausted Time. I think I knew that this was coming out, but I had forgotten about it. I read Emily Berry's 2 other poetry collections that came out previously, which was Dear Boy and Stranger Baby. I liked Dear Boy and really loved Stranger Baby, so I definitely wanted to pick this up. And because this is a poetry collection, I'll go ahead and read the synopsis for it. Feelings, messages, symbols, visions. Emily Berry's latest collection takes shape in the half-light between the real and the imagined, where everything is lost and yet nothing goes away. Here, life's innumerable impressions, moods, seasons, and déjà vu collect and disarrange themselves, while a glowing, companionable eye travels the mind's landscape in hope of refuge and transformation amid these displaced moments in time. Whether one reads Unexhausted Time as a long poem to step into, or a series of titled and untitled fragments to pick up and cherish, the work is healing and inspiring, always asking how we might harness the power of naming without losing life's magic unknownness. By offering these intangible encounters, Emily Berry more truly presents what being alive is. And now, let's go on to what I've read this week. With everything going on with traveling and my upcoming traveling this weekend, I haven't had a ton of time to read, but I did finish Imakoi Volume 3. Imakoi follows Satomi Mizusawa, who is our determined, hardworking protagonist who falls in love with the cool, reserved Yagyu, a boy in her class who saves her from a groper on the train, and Satomi musters the courage to confess to Yagyu, and their romance blossoms from there. This is your stereotypical shoujo, which really reminds me of shoujo I used to read back in the mid-2000s. It even has the author columns on the side like manga did back then, which isn't as popular now to have in manga, but was a huge staple of manga in the aughts. And this is full of traditional shoujo plot points, but questioning whether they're right for each other, disgruntled siblings upset about their relationship, school events, and now even there's an introduction to someone who will probably soon be the rival love interest. It's cute, fluffy, heartwarming, and a great quick read and a perfect palate cleanser for something that might be a little bit heavier. I definitely enjoyed this installment in the series. We follow Satomi and Yagyu during their school festival, celebrating Yagyu's birthday, and then getting part-time jobs to save up for Christmas. This volume also introduces Tatsukawa, who, if it follows normal shoujo trope, will eventually fall in love with Satomi and become Yagyu's rival. I'll definitely pick up volume 4 in this series, which is set for an English release in December of this year. And then I have briefly started Jane Emily by Patricia Clapp. This follows Louisa, who is 18, young and in love with a local town boy. They're both about to go off to college. Louisa's niece Jane is staying with her and her parents because Jane's parents died in a mysterious carriage accident. There are no survivors and nobody knows why the accident happened. Jane has become withdrawn into herself and overall pretty morose. And then a letter comes from Jane's paternal grandmother asking for Jane to come and stay with her for the summer to hopefully uplift her spirits. And Louisa, who takes care of Jane and does well with her, is asked to go along. Louisa is not thrilled by this idea. She had big plans for the summer to spend with her boyfriend, but ends up relenting and going and staying with Jane. They just got to the grandmother's house and they're talking about how Emily, who is the grandmother's daughter, died when she was very young. And then they're going to fish out some clothes for Jane, which were Emily's. And Jane is starting to become engrossed in the garden outside. And with that, I'll wrap up this vlog here. Thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.